while I was doing that, I realized I'd quite like to go into policy, because my master's degree showed me that policy, especially environmental policy, is often made without taking into account human psychology. And policymakers can often forget that you can have the best science in the world, you can have the best policies in the world, but if they're not suited to how our brains work, it's not going to work. And unfortunately, we've seen a few environmental policies which sound great on paper, but they simply don't work because they don't correspond to how we work as human beings. And one thing I personally find very important is to shift the focus away from individual behavior change, which has been which started as the zero waste movement, and becoming more sustainable, and that kind of eco movement, which is very important, and there's definitely a place for that. Consumer choice can be very powerful. But also that has been co-opted by government to a certain extent, to the point where a lot of the focus now is on the consumer, and the consumer will have to make more sustainable decisions, although we all navigate in a system that makes it very, very hard to live sustainably. So one thing I'm very passionate about is how can we change the system and shift the frameworks so that within those frameworks, sustainability is the default choice. So bringing things back to the climate crisis, what we really need to do is shift our cultural values in a direction that facilitates pro-environmental behavior. And the one value which has often been associated with pro-environmental behavior is universalism, which we also call a self-transcendent value, because you transcend yourself as an individual being, so it's more outward looking and beyond ego and selfish values, and more towards wanting society to be intact and healthy. I believe that it's really important to find a healthy balance between conveying the urgency of the climate emergency, but not falling into the doomist narrative. And I'm doing a lot of work on this at the moment. And basically, to put it short, it all comes down to binary thinking, which is very ingrained into our Western societies. We use binary thinking to, it's basically a cognitive strategy to make it easier to process information. So we have, and the doomist narrative is very dangerous in that it reinforces environmental racism. Obviously, for us in Western countries, it's a lot easier to just adapt to climate change. A lot easier in rich countries that will be less affected by climate change, like the UK. But if we look at countries in the global south, especially those which are already very hugely affected by climate change, India, Bangladesh, countries in Africa which really struggle with drought, you can't really tell them to just adapt to climate change, can you? Because those places are going to become uninhabitable if we don't tackle climate change. So in my view, climate doomism reinforces the systems of colonialism and environmental racism. And it's very important to recognize, it's very important to honor those feelings of despair and grief. It's very important that we recognize them, but it's also important to be aware that adapting to climate change and engaging in those doomist narratives comes from a place of privilege. And a lot of people don't have the privilege to just say, oh, it's too late anyway, let's just adapt to it and make the best of it. For many people, climate change is a matter of life and death.